My name's Jeff, and I work for Koa Sporting Optics. One of our hosts this evening. We're really elated to have Ken and Gina here. I've admired their work for a long, long, long time, and I'm really excited, as everyone, to hear this talk. We're jointly um, sponsored or co-sponsored as well tonight by the Florida Keys Hawk Watch and the Florida Keys Audubon Society. Both of which are, I think we've got folks in attendance from both. Obviously Florida Keys Hawk Watch ties pretty well hand in hand with what you guys are doing. They had 3 short-tailed hawks today. And a little commercial there, if I will. The Florida Keys Hawk Watch is officially halfway through its season today. It's a 2-month season, and today represented the halfway mark. And the beautiful thing is they already have more birds in the first half of this year than they had all last year. And the biggest flights are yet to come. So, you've got a whole month until November 15th if people want to get down there. And even though you're probably not going to see swallow-tailed kites, which these guys will probably get into from this point forward, the good news is they're likely going to have short tails almost every single day moving forward, and they're only going to get more and more commonplace. Like ARCI, the Florida Keys Hawk Watch works on donations. So I wanted to throw that out there. You can make a donation to help support their cause as well. But they're just under 14,000 for the year. We had 1,500 peregrines last weekend over the 3-day period of the peregrine days. So exciting stuff happening down there. If you can make it down, it's a lot of fun. There's still people filing in, but that's the end of my public service announcements. From Koa's standpoint, I will mention that we're running a promo on our most popular spotting scopes. It's a $400 off our 883 Koa 883 spotting scope with the wide angle 25 to 60 zoom eyepiece, and that's it for my business. With that, I'm not going to bore you anymore, and I'm going to turn it over to Gina and Ken, and I'll go dark as well, but we'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A as well. If you have questions along the way, you can pop them into the chat screen or into the Q&A, and we will get to those following the presentation. We'll wrap up with some Q&A. Otherwise, Gina, Ken, thanks so much for taking the time. Like I say, I love what you do over there at ARCI, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the extended play version of what's been going on, especially in the last couple of years since I last heard the full talk. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. This is Ken Meyer and Gina Kent with me. I'm going to start off. I'll tell you a little bit about ARCI. We're Avian Research and Conservation Institute, and the name pretty much tells you what we do, sort of. We do academic research on imperiled birds in the interest of informing and promoting management and conservation of these imperiled birds. Many of them, most of the birds we study, and I'll name a few as we go along, but we're just going to concentrate on 2 tonight, the swallow-tailed kite and the short-tailed hawk. With only 2 exceptions out of, I would say about 10 or 12 that come to mind that we're busy on right now. With only 2 exceptions, these are not species that are listed as threatened or endangered, either by federal or state governments. So, yet they are highly at risk. Small populations, declining, various reasons, facing threats, current or imminent, that will reduce their populations. So we sort of fill in the spaces. It's an interesting business model because it's very hard to find funding to study things that are not listed, formally listed. So ARCI started in 1997. I was a co-founder. I've been serving as the executive director since then. I'm also a senior research ecologist. And I'll do this introduction and get us started on short tails a little bit, and then Gina will come in. We'll switch back and forth a few times. So what we're going to cover tonight are the 2 species for which we have well, which we have been studying the longest. We'll start with the short-tailed hawk. Short-tails are in the genus Buteo, which is the same as for red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks, birds you might be more familiar with. But short-tailed hawks are extremely rare and very, very hard to find unless you're in the right spot in Florida at the right time, and then you look in the right place and they're very easy to see. We'll tell you a little bit about how to do that a little bit easier. But why are we concerned about short-tailed hawks? Well, the estimate for their US population is about 250 pairs. That is it. That might mean 600 or 700 individuals, counting both members of the pair and some young that aren't old enough to breed yet. They probably don't start breeding until they're 2 to 4 years old. And they come in 2 color morphs, dark and light. Pretty easy to figure out from that picture which is which. As you can see in that map in the lower left, Florida is the only place they occur in the United States. They're not in the Caribbean, which is interesting. Buteos do not like to pass over water when they're migrating or making any seasonal movements. They're a tropical bird. They're more abundant, but still relatively uncommon in most of South and Central America. And they do get up into Mexico on the lowlands, the tropical lowlands. So the short-tailed hawk is mainly a tropical bird. And as you'll hear, the swallow-tailed kite is as well. So having all the population in Florida gives us a big responsibility as bird ecologists and conservationists. This map shows you, this is an outdated map, but it's proving true as we move along in time. Red is bad, green is good. Don't worry about interpreting it any further than that. Green is conservation areas, protected areas that provide wildlife habitat for all species. Red is developed land. When this analysis was done in the intervening 15 years, things have moved faster than expected, as with climate change. Sea level rise in Florida and effects on coastal habitats are moving along probably faster than predictions. There is no question that it's happening, and we see it reflected in all kinds of vegetation and animal species. So when we look at the numbers of short-tailed hawks and swallow-tailed kites, as you see here, short-tailed hawks going across the bottom, short-tailed swallowtails, red-cockaded woodpeckers, Florida, scrub jays, bald eagles, and wood storks. Short-tails and swallowtails are the least abundant, and they are the only 2 species on that list that are not federally listed, or in the case of the bald eagle, still granted some extra special regulatory protection. So it's common that birds that are not very secure, that have small populations, in most cases are not listed because we've never had enough data to document their decline. And that's a very rigorous requirement for listing status. For threatened and endangered federal status, you have to prove an ongoing decline quantitatively. So our concerns, very small population. It's non-migratory and limited to only 1 state. If we lose this population in Florida, since they are not in the Caribbean, the closest population would be eastern Mexico. The likelihood of being recolonized by short-tailed hawks from elsewhere is very, very small. So our research goals: learn about nesting success and productivity, movement behaviors, population monitoring, and management and conservation needs and recommendations. Nesting success and productivity and movement behaviors we started in 1998 and did 4 hard years of collecting as much data as we could. More recently, it's been more focused on population monitoring and management and conservation. And I should here give credit to the late John Ogden, a very, very well-known, astute, and highly accomplished ecologist, bird biologist, et cetera, who worked with various agencies in Florida, including the National Park Service and Everglades. John is the only person prior to this work that studied short-tailed hawks. And he did observational studies, mostly natural history, basic things, nesting biology and such, but there is nothing that we have learned that contradicts anything that John discovered and published. He was an amazing person, and we owe him a lot of gratitude for helping us get started on this. This is Gina Kent going up a tree. Gina's going to take it from here and tell you about nesting biology and tracking seasonal movements, et cetera, on short-tailed hawks. I'll be back in a little bit, but Gina is a senior conservation scientist at ARCI. She's been here now about 20 and a half years. Her first project when she came on in the year 2000 was in the spring, started working on our first or our third year of short-tail hawk work, started doing work as a field technician. So Gina, I'll give it to you.
All right, thanks, Ken. So my first job coming to Florida in the spring of 2000 was to find short-tail hawk nests. And Ken will show you where a short-tail hawk nest is in this photo. There we go, a little, and this is in, I think it was a really big cypress tree. And it's actually quite an easy nest to see, and that's actually unusual. They make a very big stick nest, kind of sub-canopy, and often in these deep wetland forests. So my job was to find as many territories and nests of short-tailed hawks throughout Central Florida. And they're very secretive, and it's and the finding a nest is just a joy when you find it, because it's like an Easter egg hunt, because it's very difficult, and they put you on a bit of a goose chase, as they say. Go ahead, Ken. Short-tailed hawks are primarily bird-eating budios, so they hunt from the air. They'll be joining kettles of vultures often, and they kind of hide themselves amongst these vultures that might be swirling in the air, and then they stoop down at prey in open areas, but also in wooded areas. So they're very unusual for your typical budio type hawk, which would be, as Ken mentioned, like a red shoulder or a red-tailed hawk. Go ahead, Ken. So here's a photo of one of our climbing trips. We did some VHF tracking of juvenile short-tailed hawks. And we also put cameras up in nests so we could monitor food delivery rates and chick development, because all of these things were just not known. So we were able, some of these trees are safe for climbing, but we assessed that ahead of time. And you can see in front of this little chick, there's a little feather. So they just evidence again for feeding on birds. Go ahead, yeah. In addition to our VHF tracking of juvenile hawks, we also were catching adult hawks when possible. This is an adult dark morph. Obviously, you can tell by that solid chocolatey brown chest and inner wing lining. A juvenile short-tailed hawk dark morph would have either streaking or some spottiness in that chocolatey brown feathers. So we did a few different studies with the VHF type transmitters that you have to physically go out and search for the bird once you tag them. And we also put on some satellite transmitters, which communicate with satellites and then remotely give you the data once you put those transmitters on. And most recently, we've used GSM transmitters. So here you can see an adult short-tailed hawk with a transmitter on its back. And we've been fortunate to learn about nesting locations and movement of the birds seasonally. So we have been able to put our data together and find locations of new nesting areas, and also where their breeding and wintering areas are. So here's a photo from the air down in the Florida Keys, where the birds naturally move to every winter. So in the late or early fall, actually, the short-tailed hawks kind of move south. It is a migration within the state into areas south of Lake Okeechobee. Here's an example of one of our satellite tagged birds. We tracked it for 2 years. It was caught in the Florida Keys. And what I want you to notice about the different colors here, at the northern edge, you can see just inside from Cape Canaveral there are 2 different colors, and that represents 2 different breeding seasons. So it came back to the general area each year. And then look all the way south to the Florida Keys. So each winter, it started its wintering activity in South Florida, probably following a lot of songbirds. So if you think about it, there's a lot of migration of all sorts of things. Right now, the Florida Keys Hawkwatch is experiencing not only the raptor migration, but there's songbirds and shorebirds, and it's very possible that these short-tailed hawks are following a great source of food, just where they're concentrated in these places in South Florida. So this short-tailed hawk, which we've seen with other birds as well with our VHF tagging, starts its winter or its fall season south in the Florida Keys and Cape Sable and the Everglades, and then it moves north to areas within Big Cypress. So it spent 2 years, did the same almost exact leaving and departure and return times each year in a row. So this was, new information that we just didn't know without our satellite data. And more recently, we partnered with the St. Petersburg Audubon Society, and they have started a Raptors on the Move program where we are gathering GPS locations now with GSM type transmitters. And these are the kinds of transmitters that communicate with cell towers. So it's a whole new kind of tracking technology, but short-tailed hawks and also swallowtail kites are able to carry these transmitters to give us data via cell phone. And we've been lucky to track this bird for 2 years. And here's an example of its summer range. And it was tagged in Pinellas County. So the center of all those little lines is Sawgrass Lake Park. And we tagged an adult male on that on a territory there that stayed in Pinellas County for the whole year. It actually did not leave for a winter elsewhere. So it was sticking tight to that territory that whole time. And more recently, we have developed a monitoring protocol for keeping track of short-tailed hawks over time. Florida Fish and Wildlife granted us a study to look at different ways to monitor short-tailed hawks on their wintering grounds. We tried various routes of searching for short-tails with helicopter, boat, and road surveys. So a road survey, which is an example here, we had specific points along routes within the Everglades National Park and all the way down the Keys. Key pinpoint spots where we had seen short-tailed hawks in the past during our wintering surveys, where we would get out of the car at these locations for 7 minutes, count all the short-tailed hawks we can see. We can often, if they're close enough, we can tell what morph, if they're the light morph or dark morph. And if they're even closer, we can tell if they're young or adult birds. So that's a nice index of knowing how many hatchier birds or juveniles were born that season. And this is an index, you know, it's not a total population estimate, but over time, going to these places provides a great tool just to keep track of the population. And this was done, can't remind, or did we do this in 2006 and 2007, I think, officially with Florida Fish and Wildlife. And we are now repeating these studies. And it's something we can do with citizen scientists. These two women came with me last year, and they're going to embark on doing it on their own this year because they know the points, they know the protocol. And, you know, this coincides with Florida Keys Hawk Watch. So our data is very mutually used to keep track of the short tails in South Florida over time.
Thanks, Gina. That's great, and thanks for the mention of Florida Keys Hawk Watch. Yeah, these are two totally different methods for monitoring numbers, but they are very complementary, and it's great to know that they are there doing what they're doing. And if folks listening, if you haven't been down there at this time of year, whether you go by the Hawk Watch station or not, they can tell you good places to watch. It is an amazing show that went pretty much unnoticed and unappreciated for many, many years. All the work that we do, the common theme in what we do, I'll mention that we study 5 raptors at one point or another, and all of them pretty much right now. So short-tailed hawks, swallow-tailed kites, but also snail kites, which are federally endangered. The northern crested caracara, which is like the snail kite, a year-round resident in Florida. Neither is migratory. And now also the southeastern American kestrel, which is a discrete breeding population of the American kestrel, perhaps a subspecies. But in any case, it's limited to Florida and southern Georgia. It's declining quite steadily. And what a beautiful, wonderful bird that is so accessible, including in urban areas. And we are losing it, the kestrel, most people don't even know. So those are the raptors we study. Just on those alone, telemetry is a big tool. It's not an end-all in itself, but in every case, there's going to be questions that we can answer best by tracking birds. I'm going to give you one more example. The monitoring program that Gina described, we were very happy to be able to come up with that and find a method that worked. It happens to also be the least expensive of the ones that Gina mentioned. Helicopters are ridiculously expensive, and it wasn't very effective. The boat surveys were fairly effective, not as expensive, but the road surveys are really good. So that's one of the management applications that well, we're proud of it. And our mission is to find management applications for all of our data. It's really, if you love birds, it's hugely interesting to study them about anything. It's amazing to learn about their digestive tracts or how they molt or how feathers are produced. But we don't have time to avoid or for whatever reasons, for lack of funding, not to address questions that really do bear on their conservation. Things are changing rapidly, and as Gina mentioned, this is a bird-eating raptor, almost exclusively birds. This is a bird like a redtail or a buteo that would normally be hunting rodents for the most part, maybe some birds. But short-tailed hawks are like a cross between a buteo, a falcon, and an accipiter. Imagine a Cooper's hawk, a merlin or a peregrine falcon, and wrap them into something that looks like a small red-tailed hawk with a much shorter tail. Amazing birds, and they're just not getting any attention. So the other management, before I'll wrap up the short-tail part here with just one more example of a management application. This one we fell into. I really can't say that we thought about this ahead of time. and then tested it, and it proved effective. We came upon this by mistake. So it's very hard to find nests, as Gina said, very hard to find short-tailed nests. Because of where they nest, they're very wary. They don't give themselves away. And usually what we get is reports from birders, or we go to historic nest sites, something like that. Well, after studying them a couple of years, we realized since we're putting little VHF means just a radio transmitter. It doesn't beam up to a satellite or a cell phone tower. It just puts out a little signal that you can hear on a handheld antenna with a receiver. And you walk around out there, or you fly, or go out in a boat, you pick up the signal. If the bird goes over a hillside or the horizon, you're going to lose the signal. But for so many decades, it was a very exciting form of telemetry. So we thought, well, they're so hard to find their nests, but they're really concentrated in the Keys in the winter, as you've seen. So why don't we tag them in the winter when they're easier to find and catch? One of the best places Gina came up with is a baseball field on Key Largo, a public park, and nobody ever played baseball on it because there was usually somebody there almost every day cutting the grass. And they didn't like people to actually use the park, but it was a great place to catch short-tailed hawks. So we catch these hawks, and then in the spring, get up in an airplane with antennas on the wings. You saw an image over Key West doing exactly this. And we'd look for those radio signals, and we track the birds to their nests. Well, we started to find that they were in places that we never would have found them otherwise. Nobody would have seen them. There's an example right there. This is Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge. That forest is every bit as dense as it looks, and that blue dot represents a nest that we found from the air. That is not something we were going to hear about, or that nobody was doing eBird back then, but nobody's going to find that nest. To give you an idea, here's a picture, a close-up of that nest stand. And the nest, the best I could do, the nest is about in the middle of that picture. Now, can you imagine walking through that forest looking for a bird, no less, a nest up in a tree? So it just wouldn't happen. So this went on, and we kept finding nests. This is an extreme case, but nests we would never have found any other way, except by radio. So we did some statistics. This is about the only really hard data you're going to see tonight. But what we found was when we compared the birds that were radio tracked to a nest versus nests that were found just by finding them from a roadside or following up on a sighting, going into the woods where someone had seen a short-tail repeatedly when they were waiting with their child at the bus stop in the morning. When we compared those two types of nests found, those found with radio tracking were in in areas that had much more forest within 10 kilometers of the nest, basically. So we're saying there's no detection bias here. The radio will find the birds wherever they are, the radio transmitter. But when we compared it to sightings, nests that were found by sightings, statistically, this means that they're hugely different. We did another variable besides the amount of forest within 10 kilometers of the nest. We looked at the distance from the nest out to the edge of the forest, out to an open area, a pasture or whatever. An even greater difference between the radio track found nests and the sighted found nests, site searching. And the last variable, we looked at the amount of urban development within 10 kilometers of nest site. And again, the birds that were radio tracked to their nests were far from urban areas, basically. So after studying this bird for 4 years, what we realized was that we had an entirely wrong impression of nesting habitat. We thought we had it down pretty good, and it was entirely wrong. So this is a good heads up. Ornithologists know about this. There's not much you can do about it, but we can really be biasing our conservation-related data when we describe habitat needs, when we're only finding nests in ways where we can find them. Something to think about. Swallowtail kites and short-tailed hawks are very similar in a lot of ways. They're both tropical birds, but the short-tail, as Gina mentioned, is a short-distance migrant. You're going to hear how far swallowtail kites migrate. You may already know something about that story. Swallowtail kites eat just about anything. They eat baby birds out of nests. They eat anoles. They eat tree frogs and tree snakes. But the rest of the year, when they're not breeding, they eat all kinds of stuff, insects out of the air. Short-tailed hawks focus on birds. So very, very different in some ways, but face very, very similar conservation challenges. So we're going to move on to the swallowtail part now. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of nesting biology. This work started in 1988. It was my first professional research, and it's still going on, fortunately. It started with a great grants program from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the non-game grants program, which was eliminated. No one seemed to know that it even happened until after it was gone. But that program funded a whole lot of very useful work on species that are not listed and otherwise protected. Here's one of the first reasons I got interested in studying swallowtail kites. Map on the left shows their distribution before the 1940s, the red area, all the way up the Mississippi Valley, all the drainage of the major rivers coming into the Mississippi River. Sometime around 1900 to the 1940s, the species started to decline in the US. And by 1940, it looked like what you see on the right. And unfortunately, that remains the current distribution of swallowtail kites. They have never regained that historic range, and we don't really know why. I won't go into some of the particulars, it doesn't matter. But this is what we have. The map on the right is what we have to work with now. Swallowtail kites don't breed till they're about 4 years old. So they've got to make it to that age before they can even try to raise a family and try to replace themselves in the population. They nest in very tall, mature cypress or mostly pine trees. Their center of abundance in the United States is central and southern Florida, without a doubt. We probably have about 70% of the US population right here in Florida. And that's why we felt it's so important to keep up this work. And they almost always lay just 2 eggs. And if they manage to fledge one young about 50% of the time that they lay a clutch of eggs. That's not great. It's not terrible, but it's not terrific either. The nests are right up near the tops of the tallest trees, so the kites can get in and out easily, including the babies when they first fledge. And this is a young bird. It's probably got a few weeks to go before it's ready to fly out of that nest. You can see it's quite open up there. And they use a lot of moss in their nests, and they get a little messy after a while. I know, I can just hear you out there going, oh. They're very, very cute. They have this brown coloration in the white feathering. The white feathers fade to a pure white just about the time they're ready to fledge. But it gives them a little bit of camouflage when they're up there in the top of that tree exposed to things like predation. The great horned owl, a huge bird, is their major predator. And so the young, and even their mothers on the nest at night, are very, very vulnerable to great horned owls. And I should mention here, we have a spectacular colleague, the only other person who's studied swallowtail kites seriously. She's been at it a long time, Dr. Jennifer Colson out in Louisiana. Jennifer's head of the Orleans Audubon Society, and she's done beautiful work on swallowtails and has collaborated with us on much of our tracking studies. So our hats are off to her for all the hard work she's been doing. And I should say back before that, this is a trap, and this reminds me that the history of this trap, this is the one other person I want to credit, John Seeley, who is retired now, and I hope is getting to travel every bit as much as he wanted. He's a South Carolina bird biologist, wildlife biologist, and he loved swallowtail kites back in the early to mid 80s. That would be the 1980s. And he thought it would be great to put some little VHF radio transmitters on them to learn about them. And he didn't really have anybody to go to for help. And so he figured what he didn't know, he didn't want it to slow him down. So what a great guy. He just dove right into it, and he developed this trap that long ago. And then in the late 80s, I started using it, and slowly it evolved, but only in the fine points. And this is still the way that we catch swallowtail kites. You'll see 2 poles here. Here's one, these gold colored 30-foot high poles. And what you can't see, and what you hope the swallowtail kite can't see, is the mist net that's strung between those poles. And down here on this perch is a live, permanently crippled, probably hit by a car, great horned owl that's been in the care of a rehab facility, education bird. And here's the blind. I have to say, I've been doing this a long time, but Gina is the one who's been doing it the most uh, for a long time now, and it's all the little things that count. If any of you have been involved in trying to catch birds, it's all the details that really matter the most. And this was a very successful trap. It's caught a bird that we went on to tag, and that bird provided beautiful tracking data for over 7 years. This is up in South Carolina. So here's an adult. They're bigger than people think. They have a 4-foot wingspan, but they're so adroit, they're so elegant in the air that you just don't think they're that big. But you can see why they're called a swallow-tailed kite. That tail there is fully fanned, but that long, beautiful, pointy wing, and sort of a blue iridescence on the top of the surface of the bird. Right up there near the shoulders, you can see a satellite transmitter and the antenna coming off. This is a solar-powered satellite transmitter. We started putting them on swallowtails in 1997, and I'm going to turn it over to Gina from here, and she's going to tell you more. I was supposed to do that 2 slides ago. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gina.
Oh, Ken, you were on a roll. No problem. That was great. Right. So we catch birds to learn about all different kinds of things that we wouldn't know if we didn't put these transmitters on them. So we take the utmost care of all parts of our trapping and tagging procedure. You know, we need to make sure that the birds we capture are going to be okay to make it through, make it 7 years with giving us fantastic data. So as you can imagine, all these things we've done with short-tailed hawks and nest finding and those same things we've done with swallowtail kites, and we've learned about fidelity to nesting areas, roosting areas, foraging places, their whole migration route. This was not known before ARCI put any of these tracking devices on. So we have these fantastic tools to learn more about the biology, more about the places that these swallowtail kites need for protection. Here is an example of a fabulous phenomenon that swallowtail kites endure each year. They are social birds in most of their life. They roost together in these big communal roosts while they get ready for migration, but also during nesting season. They have nests that are kind of close to each other, which we call a loose neighborhood. It's not quite a colony. They're not like side by side, but they know where each other's nests are within one of these neighborhoods. They could be 1 kilometer apart, but they use each other to find foraging locations and roosting spots that they can, protect each other if there's predators, and keep an eye out for each other. So here's one of these communal roost sites that swallowtail kites get into before and as they're preparing for migration. So nesting has completed. The young and the adults all go to these places that we are finding more and more of these habitually used year after year communal roosts that are so important for them to get ready for migration. So as Ken mentioned before, swallowtail kites, the adults eat mostly insects. So they are in big groups trying to find ephemeral food sources, these hatches of whether they're beetles or dragonflies or stink bugs. They help each other find these big groups of insects that they can gorge on to gain weight, gain that ability to get themselves ready for migration. and you'll see them in these big foraging aggregations. There could be 300 or 500 birds in one area, and it's like a snow globe. It's just gorgeous. We were lucky up in Alachua County, and just to the west of us this year, that swallowtail kites were gathering over melon fields. So something that farmers have done in areas of this part of Florida that we're in is let their watermelons go rotten, and these crazy beetles and stink bugs kind of gather around the watermelon, and the swallowtail kites just gorge and gorge on these insects. And it's a quiet phenomenon too, which is fantastic. So they are getting ready for this. They are getting ready to cross the ocean. Raptors do not like to cross water, and they need to be very strong and fit in case they encounter unfavorable winds. So you can see here a hurricane approaching Florida at this point, and the winds that this bird probably experienced were favorable as a hurricane is turning in the direction towards Florida. The winds are favorable, and the kite would have kind of an instinct to take off on that wind that would propel it across the ocean. Unlike a peregrine falcon, swallowtail kites really can't flap their way across Florida. They're just not that strong flyers. They are fantastic gliders. They're creatures of the wind, really. They will take that tailwind as best they can to the first landmass. Go ahead, Ken. And here's some examples. Now you're gonna see a few maps like this. Each color is a different bird that we tagged in its breeding range. You can see somewhere in Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and we mentioned our colleague in Louisiana, Jennifer Colson, tagged some birds there. But you can see many of these birds funnel through Florida, whether they're from even Louisiana. We had a bird come through the peninsular Florida. And then of course the South Carolina, Georgia birds, Florida birds, they're all coming through these places in Florida before taking off and crossing the ocean to the Yucatan. So some of them go to Cuba, maybe briefly a day or two, but many cross directly to the Yucatan Peninsula. Now this is like a typical scenario for a southbound migration. This year, however, we had some crazy winds that pushed birds in various directions. And these are our 11 birds that we tagged and we're tracking this year. And you can see 3 of those lines go pretty much east-west. Well, from Florida, they go directly west across to Mexico. It was just bizarre. We had not seen that before. Now picture this red bird, if you can see it kind of starting under the D in Florida, and it was on its way, great, heading towards the Yucatan, but obviously hit a tailwind or a very strong headwind, not discouraging it from going any farther to the Yucatan. So it crossed the Gulf of Mexico, the widest part of the Gulf of Mexico. It did a crazy curly Q here and then zipped super fast straight up to Texas. This was, Ken, help me remember, was it 5 days over water? We had never ever had a swallowtail kite survive any more than like 3 days, 3 nights, maybe 4 days over water. So this kite was obviously fat and fit enough to make its way that far. Obviously, when it got to Texas, it had some reconnoitering to do. It did a couple weeks up here before continuing south, kind of getting its bearing, got to the mountain ranges, which raptors like to do, and then followed a coastline, went through Veracruz, a very famous raptor migration location. And then you can see once it gets down into Guatemala, it gets back on the main track. And then we had, you know, 2 other birds shortly follow the same route. If you see that purple line, unfortunately, we lost its signal within 11 miles from Mexico. So this bird struggled going across the ocean, and we most likely lost that bird this year, unfortunately. And then the 2 birds that went through Cuba and then almost straight to Honduras. Well, that was
I'm sorry, that 3rd bird, the blue bird?
Yep, that bird made it just fine and then followed the coastline all the way through Mexico and gathered with the rest of the birds. So once they're to Mexico, it's safe, it's over water, and the complete migration looks like, Ken, next map. There we go. So this is where they're heading, to South America. Again, this route was discovered by Ken with VHF first and then satellite transmitters. And they are making their wintering destinations to parts of Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, but mostly Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul and Rondônia as well in southwestern Brazil. So this is a 10,000 mile round trip migration that these birds endure every single year.
Thanks, Gina. It's still amazing to look at these maps. It was pretty scary this year watching that odd departure. We almost never lose a bird going south. They leave the Keys and they're looking for a bigger target. And if they go a little bit off, they'll see Cuba. They could take refuge there if they had bad weather. But they're looking for the Yucatan Peninsula. This year, we've never seen anything like that. And it's disturbing to suddenly see either a weather change that is that extreme or a behavioral change. And just to offer some possibilities, the weather in this area, the Gulf is very volatile. We can't really say what's normal. We just know that since 1996, 97 rather, we've never seen this. The other possibility besides weather changing because of climate change, we have weather systems, high and low pressure systems are doing different things, especially high pressure systems, which are becoming much larger and persisting in the Gulf of Mexico. And these birds that wound up over on Mexico this year going due west, they were just flying downwind on these east winds that were just relentless. And the kites will wait for a tailwind, as Gina mentioned, but they won't wait forever. It's, you wish you could just give them a call and say, look, I see what's happening, don't leave yet. It's going to be bad out there. But they jump off, they don't know, and they may or may not make it. Just one last thing before I move on. Before we did any of the satellite tracking, there were several possible ways suggested, several destinations for where swallowtails went in the winter and how they got there. A lot of people thought that they went to northern South America, these countries up here, Bolivia, Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, and wintered there, and that they probably went through the Caribbean. Other people thought they went over Mexico and maybe wintered in the upper reaches of the Amazon, but nobody suggested that they were doing this. So it was very exciting. In a matter of days, weeks, literally, when the birds were arriving, we were seeing this data appear. So to wrap this up, and I'm going to do the same thing here as with shorttails. I want to give you another example besides the satellite tracking. It's so useful to us because we can look at how they're doing on migration. We can look for effects of weather and weather changes. There are problems with some really pervasively used pesticides, a particular class of them called shorthand neonics, that cause disorientation in migratory birds. And we have to wonder, and in songbirds, people have seen the effects of birds going entirely bizarre directions and dying as a result. So these compounds are being used on everything now, whether they need it or not. It's so inexpensive. So that's something in the back of our minds. We're not saying that's the explanation, but we've got to be watching for that. Another management application, besides coming up with this uh, tracking method that helps us find new communal roosts, by the way. This is a picture of a communal roost from the air by Max Stone, who's an awesome photographer from Florida with as big a heart as he is a great professional, and shares all this stuff with us for talks like this. Take them up in an airplane, and by the time you land, you have no idea how many wonderful pictures you're going to see on your computer by the time you get home. This is what this is an application of discovering these roosts that turned out to be really useful. As I mentioned, about 70% of the swallowtail kites in the US nest in Florida. Others pass through from Georgia and South Carolina nesting areas. They pass through on their way south. And they come into Florida and they use these big roosts as staging areas where they put on a lot of weight. We have reason to believe it's about 25% of their body weight in a matter of a few weeks. We know of at least 12 roosts that are very, very large. This particular one in the picture is the largest. It's west of Lake Okeechobee. It was found in 1987 by Brian Millsap, who was the first, one of the first directors of the non-game wildlife program that I mentioned. Great raptor biologist. He's now out west working for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But Brian discovered these roosts, did great detective work. The next year, 2 years later, I started monitoring them from the air. We're still using the same techniques. We take pictures from the air, like the one you saw previously, and then Gina counts all the white heads. And we do that systematically every year in late July on the same days. We do it all over the state simultaneously. That upper map in the upper left is the locations for the core roosts that we use every year. So the satellite tracking is helping us discover new roosts because some of these blink out due to human disturbance. We've had some just totally get abandoned by the birds. And for other reasons, maybe change in habitat. These trees here in this picture got killed from an adjacent sand mine that may have been using chlorine down the hydraulically mined sand to clean it. This happens a lot in Florida and actually causes exactly this result. So these kites were gone within 2 years of this picture from this stand of dying cypress trees. So the satellite tracking helps us find new roosts. It gives us this basis for doing these flights by which we can then count the birds every year. We've been doing this since 1989, most rigorously since 2006. And I can give you some really good news. In the last 5 years, we have seen a slow but very, very consistent, steady increase in what we think is most of the US swallowtail kite population as it moves through Florida. So that's something that we feel very, very fortunate to have fallen into, a lot like the short-tail nest finding work that we did. And it's probably one of the most important results we've gotten. Here's one more, and I'll close with this. Swallowtail kites, we discovered right away, there's not as many nesting on public land as we expected, like national wildlife refuges, national parks, that sort of thing. They are there, but most swallowtail kite nesting occurs on commercial timberland in the southeast. Remember that map I showed you, the present map? They're in 6 states: South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. And this is what they like to nest in. An ecologist would look at this and say, well, what are they using in there? And we would say, they're using those tall trees to nest in, and they're using those medium-age forests to forage in and catch snakes and lizards out of the foliage. They're using the hardwood swamp to do the same thing, find some bird nests, songbird nests, steal the young out of the nest. Sometimes they take the whole nest back to theirs. They're using everything in that picture. That's the point. An ecologist would look at this and say, well, if you didn't tell me that had been cut by a timber company, I could say, well, maybe there'd been a natural fire, or maybe there'd been a hurricane. This is a disturbed landscape, and it has on it habitat that represents everything from what's called an early ecological successional stage, like bare ground, all the way up through flowering plants, grasses, shrubs, all the way up to the trees that will become the overstory. So the kites nest in the tall trees in both these pictures, and they forage everywhere else. And this this is nirvana to swallowtail kites. This is where they love to nest. So we joined a partnership that was begun by the American Bird Conservancy, a great friend of ours, Emily Jo Williams, E.J. Williams, from Georgia, who's now in charge of migratory birds for ABC, American Bird Conservancy. She helped us get started studying swallowtail kites in Georgia, pulled us into this, and this is a kind of a loose title, Bird Conservation in Working Forest. We originally called it Saving Forest, Bringing Back the Forest Birds. And the foresters we were working with said, well, you know, y'all come in here a little late. We've had these birds all along. And we were pleased to find out that actually these working forests, as with the swallowtail kites, we've done this rigorously, all kinds of bird surveys. And what we're finding in the bottom line, half a sentence, is our survey results on managed forests are comparable to breeding bird survey results for species abundance and species diversity on the most closely proximate breeding bird survey routes off of the managed timberland. A lot of details about that, but the bottom line is we have some recommendations that are very feasible for timber managers that also are affordable, and in some cases, thinning is one. Thinning helps them make more money from their stand. So we started out in this collaboration with ABC, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and we came to it, we were brought into it mostly because of our work with swallowtail kites on timberlands. And so we started sharing this information and the stories. Skeptical, very, very skeptical originally foresters didn't know what we were going to come up with and how we were going to use it against them. But it turns out to be probably the greatest partnership, most productive partnership I've been in my career. And as we moved along here in the last couple of years, all the major timber companies in the country, in the Southeast at least, are involved in this now, and a whole bunch of smaller ones, family-owned ones. But one company in particular, International Paper, they don't grow trees anymore. I don't know how many of you know this, but commercial timber companies sold off a lot of their lands. Other people bought it up for various reasons, but the Southeast is still a major timber producer. It's the most productive area probably, well, certainly in the Western Hemisphere for producing marketable timber. So International Paper, for like many other big companies, they don't grow trees anymore. They buy lumber from smaller companies and from family-owned, multi-generational family-owned forests. And they market it. They turn it into paper products and other things, and they market it. The International Paper people are working with a lot of small landowners. And we've gone out with them, gone out with the IP people, International Paper people, it's hard to say, and onto some of these properties where 5 generations in family, they have sustainable forests like you may have never seen. They are truly sustainable, and they're beautiful, and they don't bring much lumber off of it each year, but they have all those that succession of ecological stages. They have all kinds of things, and a lot of them have swallowtail kites. So what IP figured out was a lot of these people, they love what they've got on their land, not just the trees they sell. I know that I sound like I'm being overly glorifying this, but it's actually become a great avenue for conservation, because now IP is taking our swallowtail kite years of tracking data and nest data, over 1,000 nests, and they've incorporated it into their land assessment programs. When they go out to talk to a landowner, they open up their laptop in the field and they show the landowner what sensitive species like swallowtail kites have been found on their land, and how they can manage their land not only to make money, but to have more swallowtail kites. And that's where we come in, trying to consult on that. So this has been just a very, very gratifying, and I hope it will be a long time ongoing professional relationship. So I'm going to close with some thanks, but before I get to that, this calm picture helps me reflect on the fact that I've been doing this a long time, Gina's been doing it a long time, and our biggest disappointment, I would say, is that all that we're learning, even though we present it to agencies, federal and state and county, as much as we possibly can, no one picks it up really and turns it into management action. But what we've discovered in the last few years is, inadvertently again, by having kite nests on a national wildlife refuge or a county conservation area or a state Fish and Wildlife Management Area. We wind up working directly with the people who manage those particular parcels of land. And what we found is when they find out, they might be managing for hogs or deer or turkey or bobwhite quail. That's, that's what they're told to do. And that's awesome. But when they find they have things like swallowtail kites or short-tailed hawks, they are really, really fired up and easily engaged, and they want to know what they can do. So the bottom line here is we've developed this strategy, that a working strategy that's just been not only very productive, but very rewarding, where we go directly to the people who are going to implement the recommendations. We don't ask their bosses. They don't have to ask. And a lot of stuff is getting done. And you've seen some examples of that here with the swallowtail kites and with this working forest partnership. And I had a conversation not long before this started with my son, and I mentioned some of this to him and how I was finding it really exciting and feeling that, okay, so all this that we've done, it's not going to go to waste. Like, we really are being effective this way. This is not just a feel-good thing. If every wildlife biologist who was learning something could connect to managers where those resources could persist at the proper land ownership, we can do it. We can turn around declines. We can reinforce populations, that sort of thing. So I think that's just a great thing, a great reason to find some hope at a time when it's pretty hard to do that. Climate change is no small deal. We're getting slayed by this dragon that we created. And it's, as a scientist, I will say without any reservation, it's way worse than anyone on the street would tell you, or gets the impression or is being told it is. We have to turn things around fast. And we may be already seeing the effects in bird migration and a lot of other things. Here's an example. Interior Florida is supposed to dry down greatly as a result of climate change. We're not supposed to get extremely hotter, but these large tropical forests in Florida that are used by short-tailed hawks and swallowtail kites, they're going to become drier. They're not going to have the prey they have now, and they're going to be accessible to logging and to development for human residential and commercial uses. That's absolutely going to happen. There's no question about it. Okay, so if this wasn't enough, there's two great online articles you can go to. One was done by Biographic, which is strictly online. It's a beautiful magazine, and there's all kinds of great stories in it. I mean, it's a gold mine of stuff. And it tends to be success stories. So Stephen Bedard, their editor and their founder, came to us and said, I've heard what you're doing on Timberlands. I want to talk with you, see if we can do a story on this. Max Stone did the pictures. And you can find it online. Just look for Precarious Perch. That's the title, Biographic. And don't worry, I'm going to show you the last few slides here have a lot of stuff on them that you might be inclined to write down. You don't have to. This is going to be up on YouTube, I hope, for quite a while. And you can come back and do your homework. So look for this one. Incredible graphics and beautifully written story. And simultaneously, the same story with slightly different editing, never been involved in anything like this, was published in Audubon magazine online, not the paper version. Mac also contributed the pictures. So these two online magazines have slightly different sets of photos. Great fun to go through them. I recommend them highly. Our website, the address is right there at the top. There's our homepage banner right below. If you want to read about all this stuff, we originally had a couple of slides and it got so crowded you couldn't even see the capital letters. These are a lot of reports, but also journal articles, book chapters, species accounts that relate to just what we presented today, just these two species. So if you go to our website and then you go to publications and reports, or if you go to research, and then you'll get publications and reports, you'll find all these things, not just on swallowtail kites and short-tailed hawks, but you'll see them for snail kites and caracaras and reddish egrets and white ibises, magnificent frigatebirds, mangrove cuckoos, white-crowned pigeons. These are all species that we're studying. And one last thing I'll mention here, second to last, is we're proud to be the producers of, here with a co-author, Carl Miller, the species accounts. Originally it was the Birds of North America project. Now it's the Birds of the World series being carried on by the great Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And so much of what we've talked about tonight is in these species accounts. And last of all, if you wish, if you're inclined, and especially if you can, We certainly could use your financial help. These are tough times for nonprofits. Whether you give to us or not, please keep nonprofits of all sorts in mind. If they're doing things that you love and think are worthwhile, they really need your help. And so to make it easy, there's a donate button right there on the home page. Here are just the swallowtail kite and short-tail sources of funding for us. All amounts, ongoing, one time. We're just so grateful to all of these organizations, some state and federal agencies. The zoos have been terrific, Palm Beach and Jacksonville Zoo, et cetera, et cetera. So our hearty thanks to all of them. Please follow their work, patronize them. And I want to put this picture up here as I thank COA and thank Jeff Bowden, all of them, for hosting this. We have a kestrel, southeastern kestrel project going on. As I mentioned, this bird is disappearing, this gem of a bird, and nest boxes help. And so we're exploring how to use nest boxes, not only in artificial settings, but also in wild settings, try to help bring this bird back. We needed a bunch of binoculars for kids. We collaborate with some wonderful volunteers in Hernando and Citrus County, one of whom started a nest box program, and we're working with them now hand in hand, and they've started a really cool school program that got sort of sidetracked by the pandemic. But I called Jeff and I said, recommend something if you have it. And he recommended this fantastic, I recommend these highly. They're small, armored binoculars that are perfect for kids. They're 6 power, so shaky hands can focus on them really well, and they're beautiful optics, and they're real hardy. And they gave us a great deal on them, frankly, and really helped us out a lot in getting that project underway. So thank you all very much. And of course, thank you everyone for coming out and listening. We're available if you have any questions, any comments, concerns, suggestions. We listen to all of it. There's all the ways you can reach us. Remember, you'll find this on YouTube. So happy to take any questions or anything else you'd like to say. I'll leave that up to Jeff. Thank you very, very much.
Ken, I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to actually ask about, how COVID, sidelined or potentially sidelined the great, outreach that you're doing as well. It's not, you're just so much more than just, some stodgy scientists, that are hiding in the woods. You're out there at all levels, and I just think you guys are rock stars. So I'm so happy that you were able to come and join us. There's a bunch of questions, so people are really interested. So let's start firing through some of these. David asks if you're aware that a short-tailed hawk actually bred successfully in southeastern Arizona about 20 years ago and fledged 2 offspring.
Yes. Go ahead, Gina.
Yes, I've been following the Arizona sightings and some in New Mexico as well. But I feel like it's even more recent than 20 years ago that they fledged chicks. But yeah, pretty cool. So those birds are coming up from Mexico. It's probably, that's another study that would be fantastic to see if we could do a genetic study between Florida birds and the rest of the population, because they've been separated, by a big water mass for many years. So there's potential that there's some subspecies, all that, even, beyond. So any graduate student out there, get some money and we'll help you trap birds.
People. Awesome.
There's not a lot of nests happening as far as I know. It doesn't really grow very fast, but it got started. It's really interesting. I always say almost all the birds in Florida put a little squiggly line in front of it. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks, David.
Kevin says he's involved in the the Eagle Nest program, and wondering if there's something similar to Eagle Watch program if you guys are doing for short-tailed hawk nests in particular. I know you're starting off with the road surveys, but
Yeah, you know, we have also on our website a sightings report button, and we're gathering as many, you know, short-tailed hawk and swallowtail kite and many of the other species that Ken had mentioned, any of the sightings. And, you know, we've started started a similar project for swallowtail kites, but just because there are so few visible short-tailed hawk nests, we haven't like explored that, but we would definitely enjoy your sightings. So if you can share where you're seeing birds any time of the year. Thank you.
Well, I think this is probably pronounced Lorelei. If not, I apologize, young lady. At age 6, had a number of questions. She was
Okay.
wondering how many short-taileds have you observed and tagged, which is a really good question. She also asked if these two birds are friendly,
Oh,
which I love.
and how many birds do you think we have tagged?
I
would
should
guess-
know. Right at the top of my head.
I know. I
Fewer
feel
than
like it's about
swallowtail
100.
kites.
I feel like it's about 100.
Okay.
And then seen even more. And like at one time, be probably in the Florida Keys or Everglades, I may have seen 5 to 7 in one, you know, binocular swing around my head. But I bet the folks at Hawkwatch might have even seen more than that.
Yeah, if any of you are looking, if you're in Florida now and you want to see shorttails, this is the best time of year. That's why we're going to be doing the monitoring starting in a couple of weeks, October, November, before they move back up into the Everglades. And so you can just, here's a trick. They do hunt down low, but as Gina said, they hunt from very high up, and they get into flocks of vultures. Maybe they're disguised, I guess. Maybe prey birds don't notice them as easily. But every kettle of vultures that you see in the Keys at this time of year, just take a look at them. Look up near the top, because the shorttails rise faster, and look for the bird that doesn't look like all the others, especially the white morph. They're particularly easy to pick out.
And Ken, there was one more question she had about
Yeah, are they
friendly.
nice?
Whew, well, you know, they are territorial, so they don't like other raptors around their nest sites, because maybe they could eat their chicks or eggs, or even compete for a nest site. So, but you know, they're very loving as parents to their chicks, and very gentle and caring. So, you know, they've kind of got a tough attitude when it comes to other birds, but you know, when it's within their family, you know, with their mate and their chicks, they're very nice, very gentle.
I think all birds are very nice except when they can't be. Sort of how
Nicer
I
than
view it.
human. Alice asks if short-tailed hawks return and reuse the same nest over several years.
Yeah. Sometimes using the same exact tree, but often more so within the same stand. And that's true for swallowtail kites as well. So if you had seen a bird in a forest one year, good chance they'll come back to that same forest. Whether they're using the same tree, it's I would say 50-50 chance. But especially if they're successful, they'll be back to that stand the next year.
All right. Yeah, there's more questions coming in than we're answering. It's awesome to see this kind of people real excited about this. Average lifespan of a short-tailed hawk.
You know, that's a frequently asked question, that one, and do they mate for life? All the birds we study, people ask that. We don't know. A bird this size, once they make it past their first 3 months, their probability of living goes up. That's the critical period. I mean, you know, here you have this animal that's been hatched out of an egg and in this nest for at most a couple of months, and all of a sudden it has to fly. You know, just try to imagine that. And within a few days, it has to start catching its own food. So a lot of the young birds don't make it. Probably 50% or more don't make it through their first year, maybe 70%. Once they get into their second year, they're more likely to survive. A bird this size, like a swallowtail or shorttail, in their second year, probably up over 70, 80% chance of surviving every year. But by the next year, it's probably up in the 90s, mid 90%. So how long do they live? We can only guess if they make it to their third year, second or third year, probably about 12, 15 years old. And there's probably some birds of both species out there in their 20s, I'm sure.
Nice. Peter asked a question you danced around a little bit earlier. He said, unless I missed it, what role, if any, I think is the key there, does the state and federal government play in research and or conservation of short-tailed hawks?
Yeah, good question. Well, originally, the non-game grants program was still in business when we started doing the short-tailed hawk work, and that was the funding we used, so that was critical. That was Florida Fish and Wildlife Program. And Carl Miller, with whom I co-authored the species account, is a biologist with Florida Fish and Wildlife. He has an interest in the bird. But one of the last projects they funded is for us to develop this monitoring method to compare different methods. We came up with the cheapest and most effective, hoping that this is a classic case where, well, there it is. There's the final report, and there's our recommendation. Hire someone for 6 weeks every fall, every 3 to 5 years, to go out and check on how the population is doing and engage skilled volunteers. Never happened, and I can't blame anybody else for that. But that's the first thing that made me start to think, if this is going to happen, we're going to have to be the ones to do it. So that's why we're repeating these surveys. We don't have any funding for it. We're just squeezing it in, basically. So no, for short-tailed hawks, no, there isn't anything. And the short-tail is not on this. Florida Fish and Wildlife's got a short list of, I think, 26, maybe 27 or 8 species of birds that are considered imperiled. That status they call threatened. It is the only targeted conservation need category for birds, and it's just 20 some odd species. So again, this isn't a criticism of anybody who works in a government agency, but as I said, we're finding the best way to get things done is to find land managers who are passionate about what they're doing and want to grasp something that we have to recommend and knowledge that we have to share. And I thought about this today after talking with my son, and I thought, it's very much like farming. Land managers are it's a fascinating culture. They're not looking to move around every 3 or 4 or 5 years unless they have a terrible boss or something. They settle in. And we first started seeing in the timber industry that individual foresters on large parcels of land, they are responsible for making the management decisions. The bosses above them at the desks, they don't second guess them. And it's a real interesting culture. And I think that is also the case in habitat management, wildlands management. It all seems to be very similar. So these people are proud of what they do. They love what they do. It's a kind of farming. And it seems very similar to how people become attached to that land and they want to bring the most out of it. So if you can find people who love short-tailed hawks or swallowtail kites or anything else that are land managers and they have them on their land, they are a sponge for information and advice. And that's been really, really gratifying.
Yeah, I mean, the questions keep on coming. I think I kind of get the feeling we could keep this going.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can address them later and respond to these people?
Yeah, why don't we reiterate? There it is. The slide that's up, folks. You've got the emails there.
Yes.
You can always reach out to us at COA as well, and we can find Ken and Gina, get you in touch as well through the Florida Keys Hawk Watch. They'll help you through Facebook, or you can reach out to any of us.
They can just write directly to those email addresses, copy us, write to both of us, and put your question in an email, and it'll take a little while maybe, but we'll get back with you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is awesome. Like I said, we've got more questions now than when we started. So it's just like, we're not getting anywhere here. It's awesome to see so much interest, and I knew there would be. I'm always fascinated to hear you guys speak. As a raptor junkie myself, ex-raptor trapper, et cetera, so forth. So thanks again for taking the time, you guys, and enjoy a cold beverage. And thanks again for taking the time. Folks, don't forget once again that there is a donate. If you enjoyed tonight's program, reach out to ARCI and support them and help their crucial research that they're doing as well. It's been a real pleasure, Gina and Ken. Thank you both for taking the time. And again, I think it's just awesome that we're still seeing people that, want to keep asking you questions. It's
Jeff, I do have one
Yep.
question that often is asked, and sometimes we get to talk about it and sometimes not, but people want to know how much it costs to do this stuff.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can tell you, and one reason we are very happy to get donations to buy the equipment, the transmitter, very expensive technology, whichever kind it is, and to travel to a place where you might be able to catch a bird, and then to succeed at catching a bird. That alone, right there, costs $5,000 to $10,000 per bird, and we're known for being thrifty. We try to keep our budgets down. We try to spread the money around. So that's just to get the data to come in, and then we have to do the analyzing and interpreting and reporting, and then get it out into the hands of managers. So that's one reason why we really appreciate your help. We're passing on the request to organizations, whatever. Sorry for that long spiel.
No, don't be sorry. And I, that brings me to another point. You said, was it Clearwater Audubon or St. Pete Audubon?
St. Petersburg, yes.
St. Petersburg Audubon that sponsored a bird. So here's an idea, that's, challenge anyone that's on there. You've got your local Audubon Society and you want to have your bird, maybe they can come up with the funds to get a bird tagged and, help collect more of this vital research for you guys.
In St. Pete's case, they did a swallowtail, a shorttail, and a snailkite.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yes, I mean, it's amazing. And we get a lot of support from Audubon chapters. We've been averaging 40 or 50 talks a year recently. Most to Audubon chapters, but others. We feel like it's a really important part of our mission. So thank you so much for this opportunity, because and it's really pretty cool to not have to drive 4 hours and fall out of your car and walk in and give a talk. But yeah, we love doing it. So when we can, again, folks, invite us. We love come out and share what we can.
Well, thank you again. And I guess we'll close with that. Please support these folks. And thank you for taking the time, both the folks that stuck with us and asked so many great questions and watched the presentation. And Ken, Gina, again, thank you so much for what you do day in, day out.
Yeah, it's been awesome, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Enjoy your evening.